Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about everyone's favorite lore of magic, shadows. This is going to be a rating video showing you guys, hopefully, how well the lore of shadows works and telling you whether or not it's a great lore of magic in Total War Warhammer 3. So, our first thing that we need to look at is all of the spells individually, and then we can give it a rating in general. Our first spell is called Melkov's Mystifying Miaza. Now this is a direct damage spell, which does a pretty decent amount of damage and has a moderate duration and cooldown. So, how I'm going to be rating most of these spells is by looking at how effective it is against armor, against different types of armor, and we broke it up into categories of armor that is less than 50, armor that is more than 50, and armor that is more than 100. If it gives any contact effects, we will rate what type of contact effects those give, and then we will rate the Winds of Magic and Overcast abilities on the spell. So, the first spell, Melkov's Mystifying Miaza, if we see, we can cast it on these Marauders of Khorne with dual weapons. They have a 35 armor, so we'll cast it. And when I compared the damage to how much hit points they had, this is not a very good spell. It's the spell you guys start with the Lore of Shadows, which makes a lot of sense that it isn't a good spell. It just doesn't do really any damage, but it does apply a pretty good contact effect, which is negative 25% speed. So, when there are units charging at you and you need to get away from them with your archers or whatnot, this is a good spell to keep in your pocket, because you can do a little bit of damage to them and slow them down. It only takes 6 Winds of Magic to cast, which means it's a really good spell in terms of Winds of Magic efficiency. However, its Overcast is pretty terrible. It extends the range of the spell by 200 meters, making it able to cast a lot further, which is alright, but at the same time, if it had been given like an AoE capability, it would have been much better for this direct damage spell. So I rate this spell 3 out of 10. Not a very good spell, just because it doesn't do really any damage, and unless you need to like have that negative 25% speed given, then it's pretty bad. The next spell that we have is Orkram's Miazazor. Sorry if I can't pronounce that. Mind Razor. Orkram's Mind Razor is a augment spell, which means you apply it on a unit, and that unit temporarily will get the buffs of the spell. So, Orkran's Mind Razor gives plus 50% base weapon damage and plus 50% armor piercing weapon damage, which for most units will add about 40% damage buff. On top of this, it gives magical attacks, which is great when fighting things like Demons of Chaos or even Warriors of Chaos that have physical resistance is in their army. So it's a great spell. It's got a really good cooldown versus duration time. Great effects, like I was saying. Doesn't give any contact effects because you're not affecting an enemy unit. Instead, it gives you these imbued effects because it's augmenting your allies. It's a great type of cast. I really like augments. They're really helpful to like make sure that your units are either actually being able to take on a matchup that they got put in, or just doing even better in combat to reduce casualties and stuff like that. It only takes 8 Winds of Magic, which is pretty solid. And then when overcasted, or commands Mind Razor becomes an AoE, which is great, and it affects all allies in range, not just a certain number, so it is a very, very good spell to overcast when you have a line of infantry that needs to do some damage. I'd give this spell a 7 out of 10, really good spell. That spell that you saw in the beginning of the game, the Pit of Shades. The Pit of Shades is the really high Winds of Magic spell on this list, and it takes 15 Winds of Magic, which initially seems like a lot and will make you think, oh, it's gonna do loads of damage. Well, it does. It does lots and lots of damage against any type of armor piercing, or any type of armor, because it has 100% armor piercing damage. It's got a good duration, a good radius, and it stays stationary, which is really good for vortex spells. Most vortex spells will just move about and hurt your own units along with hurting the enemy units, which isn't great. But this one, it allows you to be able to deal damage in only one specific area, which is what we always like to see. On top of this, when you overcast the spell, you get even more damage, which is really great, and it improves how much, never mind, it just does more damage. About 60% more damage. So really good spell. Doesn't give any contact effects, which means it's a little bit, it could be improved. But really good spell. It's just very costly, which means I would rate this a 6 out of 10. The next spell in the roster is the Enfeebling Foe. The Enfeebling Foe is the best spell on this spell roster, and causes an enemy to take a negative 24 to both melee attack and melee defense, which means you can take really powerful lords and tank all of their stats, or pretty powerful infantry and also reduce their stats to nothing. For example, this Chaos Lord right here, taking a negative 24 melee attack and melee defense, makes him a low threat to my Archmage, which would generally get absolutely crushed. And if I were to do the same thing on these Forsaken right here, which are initially a high threat, they become a low threat when they have no melee defense and basically no melee attack. Then I can just charge in, do a whole bunch of damage, maybe pop down another spell on top of them if I have to. Really great spell. It has great cooldown. Its overcast effect is really good. It doubles the duration of the spell, making it actually last longer than its cooldown, which is really great. And it only costs 6 Winds of Magic to cast it, which means it's one of the better one of the best spells that you have in this specific lore. It's also a hex spell, which is generally pretty good. I prefer augment spells over hex spells because for the most part augments are just better, but it's still a really good spell, and always one you want in your army. The next spell is the Penumbral Pendulum. This is a wind spell that, as you're about to see in a second, does quite a bit of damage versus moderately armored units or less than moderately armored units. So this is a really great spell if you have about 2 or so units lined up and you need to do a little bit of damage to them. So it's got basically no duration, and it has quite a big cooldown, but it does make up for it in its effective damage against small armor and moderately armored troops. It's a wind spell, which means it's one of my favorite types of spells because they're pretty easy to cast and get off to affect the enemy and do the types of damage that you want, where you want, and since a lot of battles are fought in lines, where you have a line of infantry fighting a line of infantry, most wind spells are really good because they affect that type of formation. It takes 12 winds of magic to cast the Penonjal Pendulum, which is kind of expensive, especially for its damage output. Like, as you could see against these Forsaken, it did quite a bit of damage, but I also landed in Dragon, which did even more damage to it. So I think that this spell is a 4 out of 10. Definitely not the best you have in this lore of magic, but it is still good if you need, or in the right situations where there's a lot of guys stacked up. The overcast of this spell just increases the amount of damage it does by about 40%, which is pretty good. But overall, I would rate this spell a 4 out of 10. Again, no contact effects, not a ton of damage unless you're given the proper situations, and takes a really long time to have it cool down. The final spell is the Withering. The Withering is a actually pretty good spell because it's another hex. So the lore of Shadows is more of a hexing and augmenting sort of lore, and the Withering, as you can see, can take a unit that is that has armor and reduces its armor significantly. On top of this, it reduces leadership, and that's what I think is more important, is reducing the leadership of enemy units, because when you can reduce their leadership, you can make sure that they're breaking. On top of this, reducing armor is really good, especially if you have a lot of units that only have base weapon damage and not a lot of armor piercing weapon damage. I would rate this spell a 7 out of 10. Now, every lore of magic has one final thing up its sleeve. Every time you cast a spell, at least when you get the trait, you have a certain passive ability that gets proctored when you cast a spell. Its effect range will be generally all across the map and has a moderate duration. This ability from the Lore of Shadows is called Smoke and Mirrors, which in my opinion is one of the worst passive abilities ever. It gives you plus 10% speed, plus 10% turn speed, and plus 10% charge speed for a duration of 24 seconds. And because it's dealt in percents, that means if I cast a spell, my Archmage here will get another 9 speed, which that's not a lot. And in terms of comparing it to other passive abilities from other lores of magic, it's just not good. Other ones will like deal leadership, which would make a lot more sense for this type of lore of magic. I'd rate it a 5 out of 10 though, because in reality, having extra speed is always good, and it has a very good duration to it. So what would I rate the lore overall? Well, I'm using out of 100 instead of out of 10, and I'd give this a 55 out of 10. This is mid-lore of magic. It has quite a few good hex spells. It has the Mind Razor, which is a good augment spell, but in terms of damage dealing capabilities, it's just not good. So unless you have a good army, or they have a good army, and you're able to use these spells where you need it to be, then it's just not a great lore of magic. So 55 out of 100, that's what I'd rate this. I hope you'll check out the next video that comes out in this series, where I'll be rating more lores of magic for you, and maybe you can see if I'm right about it or I'm wrong about it, because this is all just my opinion. Thank you, and I hope you have a good day.